Welcome to Jessie at Home. In this video, I'm going to help you out with the slip stitch bow tie. I'm just going to show you how the first row is started, a couple of the increases, a couple of the decreases, and how the border goes. Alright? So to begin, I know that the pattern says to chain 15 and to skip one, but we're going to start off with chaining 5. Then you're going to skip 1 and slip stitch in the bottom loop of each remaining chain across. So these are your bottom loops. We're going to skip the first one and we're just going to slip stitch into each of the remaining 4. Okay, so you're going into the bottom loop. By going into the bottom loop, it leaves you the pretty little V's on top. So that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you're not familiar with slip stitch and with using it as an actual stitch and all that, in the abbreviations chart at the top of this pattern, the slip stitch is highlighted, and if you click on that, it will take you to the Stitchopedia post that goes into slip stitch more in depth. Okay, with this, I'm going to work on the thought that you have a basic knowledge of how to use a slip stitch. Okay, so if you watch those videos on that link, you should be able to go from there. Now, what you're doing now for increasing rounds, or let's do a couple of regular rounds, which is simply to chain 1, turn, and then slip stitch into the back loop only of each of the previous stitches, So you ignore your chain 1 that you turned with, and we're going to slip stitch into the back loops. There should still be 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is obviously much bigger yarn and bigger hook than what's used in the pattern, but I want to make sure you can see what I'm doing. We'll do one more regular row with no increases or decreases. So we're going to chain 1 and turn, or turn and chain 1, either way. And we're going to slip stitch into the back loop only of each stitch. There should still be 4. 1, oops, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now let's make an increase round. We're going to chain 1 and we're going to turn. To do our increase rounds, we do the chain 1 and the turn, and then we slip stitch into each stitch across. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you see this little bump right here? That's from our turning chain. To do our increase row, we're going to also slip stitch into that turning chain. So you see that little bump that happens after our last stitch right there? We're now going to slip stitch into that. And that will give us one more stitch. Okay, I'll show you once more going the other direction. Chain 1, turn. Okay, now we have 5 stitches because we just increased 1, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 because we just increased 1. Now we're going to increase 1 more, which means here's that little loop, that little bump right there from our chain 1 turning, from our chain 1 that we used to turn. You're going to insert your hook into there, yarn over, and pull through. And now we've increased. Okay, so now I'm going to show you 2 decrease rounds, chain 1 and turn. For a decrease round, we always ignore the turning chain. We also, in a decrease round, are going to skip the first slip stitch. So we ignore the turning chain, we're skipping the first slip stitch. We had 6, so now we'll only have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, I'll show you one more decrease round. Oop, or row. chain one, turn. We're skipping our turning chain, we're skipping our first slip stitch, and we're starting in the second slip stitch. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and let's do one more regular row now, which was chain one and just slip stitch into the back loop of every single stitch. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. Now, you see how we kind of went up and then went back down again? Now, I just want to check my wording on how I explain your edging. All right, so on the edging, once you've finished your 1/2 of your bow tie, you're going to chain one and turn. Boop. Okay, just like you would for a normal round, and you're going to keep going like you would for a normal round row. You're going to slip stitch in the back loop only of the first stitch and each of the next 3 stitches, because we're down to 4 at this point, even in the pattern, so that would be 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you're going to chain one. You're going to rotate the piece. So now we're along the side of the piece. You're going to slip stitch along the edge by placing 1 slip stitch in the chain one at the edge of every other row. Okay, every other row we turn. Every other row we turn on this side, and then in the opposite rows we turn on this side. Alright, so rows maybe 1, 3, 5 we turned on this edge, and rows 2, 4, 6 we turned on this edge. So there's only a turning chain, one of these little bumps, on every other row. The other thing is, depending on where your increases are, sometimes it's harder to find the turning chains. But if you look really closely, you can kind of see, here's a ridge, here's a ridge, here's a ridge, here's a ridge. Basically, you're going to slip stitch into the edge of each ridge. Something important to note is, right now this is really stretchy. As we slip stitch, it won't be quite so stretchy. Now, you certainly could slip stitch into every kind of valley and every peak, doing twice as many slip stitches, but it might get a kind of ruffly look on the edge. What I do is I just slip stitch really loosely so that it still has some pull, but honestly it doesn't need to be as stretchy as it is. A little bit of stretch is really nice. You know, it's not quite so constraining around your neck since it is a bow tie, but you don't want too much stretch. It's not necessary. So to slip stitch around, I'm just going to catch the bump at the top of each one of these ridges and slip stitch loosely. Okay, just kind of pull it a little tighter, a little longer. You can even use a larger hook if you want. It's just a matter of whether or not it'll fit into your stitches. But if you have a nice pointy end one and you think you can fit into your stitches, then go ahead and use a larger hook to get yourself a looser slip stitch. Okay, so that we slip stitched into the top of this ridge. Now we're going into the top of this one. Okay. This definitely requires a little finagling. Slip stitch is not the quickest thing. Now we're going to the top of this one. It's a little harder to find that point because this was where we did an increase. So we actually already slip stitched into that chain one. You can either grab that again or you can grab this little piece, whatever floats your boat, as long as you get one in the top of this ridge somehow or other. Okay? Now here's the next ridge. We're going to get one in the top of that. And we'll even go ahead and grab one right here at the edge of this. Now you're going to chain one and rotate again. And now we're just going to slip stitch in the back loops of this row. 1, 2, 3, 4, and keep on going that way. Chain one, rotate, and put a slip stitch in the top of every ridge. Okay, so you just kind of find a spot in the top of the ridge, chain one. Oh, I pulled that one kind of tight. Top of the next ridge, chain one, top of the next ridge. Okay, chain one, next ridge, not chain one, sorry, I keep saying chain one, slip stitch, sorry about that. And then you get to the last ridge and you slip stitch, and then when you end off, you know, you'll just clip your yarn and then you'll pull it through. If this was clipped, it would pull all the way through and tighten it up, and then you can still weave in your ends and everything. You can see there's still stretch to it, but you can see that it kind of is stopped a little bit by the actual slip stitch around the edge. And this gives it a really nice finished look. And the fun thing if you're doing variegated yarn is you get a different color around the edge, or you can do it in a solid color and do the finishing edging in a different solid color. You can do the inside in a variegated and do the outside edging in a solid color, whatever floats your boat, but it gives you a nice look around. And if you look at the pictures in the post, you can see the various bow tie pictures. If you happen to be wondering what's going on because you're watching this on YouTube and you don't see the pattern, if you look underneath this video, there's a description section, and in that description section there's a link that will take you to the actual slip stitch bow tie pattern, and that will give you all of the numbers and everything you need to make the bow tie. This video is simply to show you the various techniques used within the pattern. So I hope that was helpful to you, and I hope you enjoy your slip stitch bow tie.